Geauga Lake sits 30 minutes southeast of Cleveland, Ohio, in a town called Aurora. Looking at it today, there's not much to see. It looks like a lake. If you look closer, you can see remnants of what used to be. An entry plaza, ride footers, a parking lot. It's hard to believe by looking at the aerial shot in 2020 that this was once a thriving amusement park. I'm sorry, I don't mean to undersell it. It was once the world's largest theme park, and that was less than 2 decades ago. There have been a lot of stories written over the years about Geauga Lake, and this isn't going to be just another one of those. This story is going to zoom in on a specific 5-year window when this sleepy little classic park was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. This is the story of how Six Flags tried to build the ultimate mega park and how they failed in spectacular fashion. It's important to understand a little backstory about Geauga Lake to make the story that much more tragic. The park traces its origins back to 1889 and was basically a picnic area with a 60-acre lake as the backdrop. It wouldn't be long before they would introduce their first ride, a carousel, and the park would start to expand. They built the world's tallest and fastest coaster in 1925 in the Skyrocket, later renamed Clipper, and finally Big Dipper, standing 65 feet tall and topping out at 32 miles per hour. The park would continue its modest existence through 1969 when it was sold to Funtime Incorporated, whose business was to turn the park into a real amusement park. They immediately started adding major new attractions throughout the 70s and into the 80s, including the Aero Looper Double Loop in 1977 and an Aero Corkscrew the very next year. The year after being acquired by Funtime, Geauga Lake would have a new neighbor. In 1970, SeaWorld Ohio would be constructed on the north side of the lake, and by the 1990s, both parks were thriving and expanding. Funtime ran this park for 26 years before being bought out by Premier Parks in 1995. Premier then turned around and purchased Six Flags from Time Warner in 1998 and rebranded itself as Six Flags Theme Parks Incorporated. And this is when all of those Premier Parks suddenly took on the Six Flags name. Just to name a few, Adventure World became Six Flags America, Riverside Amusement Park became Six Flags New England, and Geauga Lake became Six Flags Ohio. This change was made for the 2000 season. When Premier Parks bought Geauga Lake, they had a few old-style coasters. Big Dipper was still going strong, as was Double Loop, and a newer wooden coaster from the Din Corporation, Raging Wolf Bob's. The Corkscrew was removed the same year that Premier Parks bought the park, and it was relocated to a park in India. Premier helped the park out a little bit in those first few years, with a Vekoma Boomerang in 1996 and a Vekoma Suspended Looping Coaster in 1998. But things took a drastic turn with the Six Flags rebranding. There was a standard that Six Flags held for their parks, and in order for the old Geauga Lake to fit into it and truly become Six Flags Ohio, the park needed some help. But rather than do this gradually, with a steady influx of investments on a yearly basis, it was all done at the same time, literally at once. No time like the present, apparently. Six Flags was given $40 million for investments for its first year as Six Flags Ohio. This included 20 new rides, 4 new coasters, and not just any coasters. We're talking about the longest B&M floorless coaster ever built, a CCI wooden hybrid coaster, a 70-mile-per-hour, 180-foot intimate impulse coaster, and finally, a Zero Tivoli family coaster. There would be retheming and rebranding all over the park, as it was flooded with Looney Tunes and DC Comics, including a new land called Gotham City, where their new floorless coaster, Batman Night Flight, would be found. Little Geauga Lake was now a legit member of the Six Flags chain. This could have been enough. Heck, this may have seemed like enough at the time. There was some wheeling and dealing going on between Six Flags and Anheuser-Busch regarding the future of the 2 parks on each side of Geauga Lake, and this led to an unprecedented opportunity that Six Flags could not pass up. In 1997, as the first coaster war was really heating up, SeaWorld started expanding out from its animal shows and exhibits and started adding roller coasters into their parks, starting with the Great White in San Antonio. This was followed by Steel Eel in the same park, and then Kraken in the Orlando park. Nothing of the sort was coming to SeaWorld Ohio. The story that seems to be kicked around more than any other is that there was some kind of long-standing agreement between the Geauga Lake Amusement Park and SeaWorld that SeaWorld would not impede on Geauga Lake's domain by adding coasters. It may have also been the case that the city would not allow coasters above a certain height on the north side of the lake. Six Flags would run into this restriction when they looked to build a 200-foot hypercoaster on that side of the park, but were reminded that there was a 35-foot height limit. Regardless, the coexistence between the two parks that lasted from 1970 through 2000 looked like it would no longer be viable, especially with the rumors that Six Flags no longer wanted to do any cross-promotions with SeaWorld that had previously been done under Fun Times ownership. Six Flags and SeaWorld both felt this rift and knew that it was either going to be us or them. Anheuser-Busch actually offered to buy Six Flags Ohio from Six Flags, but Six Flags decided to turn the tables and make an offer to buy SeaWorld. $110 million later, SeaWorld was now in the grasp of Six Flags. The animals would be removed from the Ohio park and dispersed into the other SeaWorld properties in California, Texas, and Florida. It seemed like this may have been the end of SeaWorld Ohio as we knew it, and Six Flags would bulldoze the empty animal exhibits and use the land for future expansion. But Six Flags had a grand plan for the old SeaWorld Ohio. They were able to populate the exhibits with animals they borrowed from Six Flags Marine World, as well as another park called Marineland in France. 2000 was insane enough, but 2001 would be even better. Six Flags Ohio would last for just 1 year. It was now Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, the world's largest theme park at 700 acres. To put that into perspective, Disney's Animal Kingdom sits on 580 acres, though a lot of that park is not developed yet. For Ohio residents, they can compare this to Cedar Point, an absolutely massive park in its own right, with 364 acres. That's just about half as much as the new Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. And ultimately, this was the point. Cedar Point was the king of amusement parks, and had been so for a long time. Located just an hour and a half away, Six Flags saw this unprecedented opportunity to one-up Cedar Point with more than just great coasters. This would be 3 unique experiences for the price of one: an amusement park, a water park, and marine life shows and exhibits. This was going to be a destination park. The excitement level was at a fever pitch going into the 2001 season, with the cherry on top being the brand new Vekoma flying coaster, X-Flight. This would be the last new coaster added to this park, and 3 years later, Six Flags would sell their mega park to none other than Cedar Point's parent company, Cedar Fair. How could this have happened? For starters, nobody had ever attempted to build a park this large. Nobody had even really come all that close to Worlds of Adventure's 700 acres. The park spanned over 3 townships, and Six Flags had to pay taxes for each one, which became a financial burden. This was literally 2 parks merged into one, so it ended up with 2 parking lots, 2 entrances, 2 of everything that a normal park would only need 1 of. And people were getting worn out exploring this giant park. The park was doing great since the $40 million expansion of 2000, increasing attendance by 42% from 1999. But combining 2 small regional parks does not automatically prepare the property to become a destination park. Destination parks also require a certain amount of infrastructure in the surrounding area, most notably, roads and hotels. Aurora, Ohio was not built for a major influx of people flooding to the area to visit a 700-acre megapark. This went from Little Geauga Lake and SeaWorld in 1999 to Six Flags Worlds of Adventure in 2001. Literally no time to build new roads, widen existing roads, and build the hotels necessary to accommodate the crowds. It kinda reminds me of Jacksonville hosting the Super Bowl in 2005. There's a good reason the NFL hasn't come back there since. Sandusky, Ohio is not in a big city either, but Cedar Point's growth was slow and steady over a century, and there are hotels all over town to accommodate the larger crowds. But back to Worlds of Adventure. The local government was not quick in accommodating Six Flags requests, especially regarding infrastructure, and they were stuck with a long stretch of a 2-lane road being the only real path to get to the park. Six Flags needed to see a jump in attendance to justify these investments, and they got what they wanted, but it turns out that they were woefully unprepared for the results of their success. The 2-year expansion was definitely drawing in bigger crowds, and neither park was meant to handle that many people, causing uncomfortable congestion and crowds. So people came to see the park, had a bad experience, and didn't come back. Six Flags also packed the park with 5 coasters over the 2-year span of 2000 to 2001. And that could have been 6 had the government approved that hypercoaster on the SeaWorld side of the park, but they didn't care to make any other investments that were needed to make for a pleasant experience. There were complaints about the park's commitment to cleanliness, maintenance, and park staff that all needed to be ramped up to keep up with the increased attendance in all of the new attractions. Worlds of Adventure was a microcosm of the Six Flags chain as a whole at the turn of the millennium. The cheap season pass price brought in hordes of teenagers looking for something to do in the summer, driving away the local family-oriented clientele that Geauga Lake and SeaWorld had relied on for decades. Six Flags invested way too much, way too fast, and the return on their investment was not enough for it to be a smart business decision. After that 42% attendance spike in 2000, Six Flags was disappointed to see a small decline in attendance for 2001, despite the combination of the two parks plus the brand new X-Flight. One of the problems that people point to was the Six Flags marketing strategy. They were trying to draw people from Cleveland, but also from Pittsburgh and Detroit. Detroit was especially problematic, since those people would have to drive 90 minutes past Cedar Point to get to Worlds of Adventure, which was a big ask, and frankly, was not gonna happen. Attendance was still around 2.7 million in 2001, but slipped 21% to 2.15 million for 2002, and down another 7% to 2 million in 2003. This would slip all the way down to 700,000 by 2004. But by then, it wasn't Six Flags' problem anymore. It was Cedar Fair's. The sale went down on March 10, 2004. It wasn't just Worlds of Adventure's poor performance that caused the sale. The onset of Six Flags' financial problems reared its ugly head starting in 2003. By the end of the summer of 2003, the chain had already lost $122 million, and they reported a dip in overall attendance of 7.2% from 2002. 2003 would mark the fifth straight year of the chain being unprofitable. The influx of coasters added from 1999 to 2001 was not helping, and those additions, along with the new parks that they had acquired, exploded Six Flags' long-term debt to $2.3 billion. And the interest on that debt made it impossible for the company to turn a profit. There were talks to sell off some parks to raise cash. Between 2004 and 2006, they got rid of their European parks, Elitch Gardens, Darien Lake, Wild Waves, as well as Worlds of Adventure. During this time, they also lost Astroworld when they decided to demolish the park. They also abandoned New Orleans after it was damaged by Hurricane Katrina. Their investments were severely restricted in 2004. Then they rebounded a bit with the good economy of 2005 and 2006. But the recession that kicked off in 2007 drove the park to eventually file for bankruptcy in 2009. They would re-emerge afterward with a completely different business model. They would now be the discount chain. Cedar Fair's ownership of Geauga Lake was problematic and could be the subject of a whole other video. And fans of the park were very suspicious of how Cedar Fair was treating it, given its proximity to their flagship park of Cedar Point. Cedar Fair realized that the park was too big and had expanded too fast, and scaled it back, immediately closing the SeaWorld side of the park and never putting in a significant new investment. There were a lot of reasons that the rest of the park was shut down after the 2007 season, and it wasn't Cedar Fair's finest moment. But those final few years were just the final nails in the coffin of this 118-year-old park. It really was Six Flags that destroyed this park, using the same business model that they would employ across the entire chain that would lead to their bankruptcy in 2009. They killed a park that had survived a century of ups and downs, and in 6 short years, the world's largest park was whittled down to just a small water park. And after the 2016 season, that would close too, leaving absolutely nothing. Let's take a look back at the satellite image. This was the site of the megapark that was supposed to be Six Flags' answer to Cedar Point in the Battle of Northeast Ohio. There's nothing left. It flamed out. Six Flags tried to make the park into more than it could be for the area that it was in. I got to visit Six Flags Worlds of Adventure for one day back in June of 2002, and I had a great time here. I really just came for the coasters, so I didn't venture into the SeaWorld area, but it's an experience that I feel really fortunate to have since it would be wiped off the map just a few years later. Let me know what you think of Six Flags' short reign over Geauga Lake, and what you think was the biggest driving force behind its failure to become a major destination park that would compete with Cedar Point. Before I sign off, I just want to thank Extreme Coasters Network for allowing me to use all of their great footage of Worlds of Adventure from 2003 and Geauga Lake from 2007. This footage is priceless, and I really appreciate the channels that allow other channels to use their footage. I want to support community-friendly channels that are willing to help people out like that, as long as proper credit is given. So big shout out to channels like Extreme Coasters Network, Sean Flaherty, El Toro Ryan, David Ellis, James C., Park Pros, Theme Park Worldwide, Top Thrill Coasters, Coaster Hipster, Coaster Crutchfield, and a bunch more that I'll be sure to give a shout out to in the future. It's people like that that make videos like this possible. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.